The political environment we are looking at today, it's not just chaos. We're seeing an absolute institutional breakdown.
That's right. The sources we have in front of us, they reveal a system that is actively prioritizing personal loyalty.
And financial crime, it seems.
And financial crime, all over national security and, the actual rule of law. It's staggering.
We are going so far beyond the headlines here. We're going to analyze the raw, unchecked demands of a political figure attacking a politician for what he calls disloyalty.
And we're going to dissect just the blatant hypocrisy of MAGA Republicans who are now forced to defend pardons for major narco traffickers.
Ponzi fraudsters. We can't forget them.
No. And then there's this shocking new U.S. national security strategy that, it aligns almost perfectly with the goals of the Kremlin to dismantle European unity. It's all in the document.
We'll also lay bare the propaganda campaigns that are being used to divert your attention away from true accountability.
And finally, we're going to examine how former officials are defending these brutal, racially charged immigration policies that are now targeting U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens under the guise of reasonable suspicion.
This isn't just political drama. This is a direct threat to the foundations of the U.S. democratic system.
It's the collapse of accountability.
Let's start with the evidence. The sources show this collapse is deeply personal, and it's transforming a constitutional power into a tool of really personal control.
Okay, so this first incident, it's the perfect place to start. It really sets the stage.
It's the attack on Congressman Henry Keller, a Democrat from Texas. And this isn't just a political jab. The sources frame this as a mechanism for exposing an authoritarian demand for fealty.
It's remarkable because it's so explicit. The transaction is right there in the open. Keller had been, accused of fraud by the Biden DOJ.
Right.
So Trump comes in and he uses the presidential pardon, a power that's historically meant for, mitigating injustice or showing clemency.
A tool of state.
A tool of state. And he grants Keller that reprieve.
Yeah.
But the expectation of repayment. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't for the country. It was entirely personal.
So Keller takes the pardon, as anyone probably would.
Of course.
But he stays a Democrat. And that right there is where the deal breaks down in Trump's eyes.
And Trump's response is it's an astonishing public declaration. He calls Keller's choice to stay in his own party the ultimate act of disloyalty.
The ultimate act. That language goes so far beyond normal political rivalry.
It does. It completely redefines the office of the presidency.
Yeah.
Presidential favors are no longer acts of the state in this framework. They're commodities.
Purchased with state power.
Exactly.
Right.
Purchased with the authority of the state, and they demand a very specific form of repayment. Absolute personal fealty to the leader.
So when that debt isn't paid, in this case, by switching to the GOP, it's not a political disagreement. It's framed as a personal betrayal.
A deep personal betrayal. And the attack, it didn't just stop at political anger. The source material highlights this truly aggressive, personalized almost, as you said before, almost medieval public shaming that followed.
He went after Queller's family.
He went right after the family. The language he used reveals everything about the demand. Trump publicly claims that Keller had shamed your daughters.
Unbelievable.
He asserts that the pardon was only granted because the daughters had allegedly written a letter asking for it. So he's making the implicit contract totally explicit.
The message is, I did this for your family, so your political career, your loyalty, now belongs to me.
And if you fail to deliver, the punishment is public shame for your entire family unit.
Let's analyze the precedent here. Historically, have presidential pardons ever been so openly weaponized like this?
It's highly unusual. I'd say it's unprecedented in modern American history to have a pardon so publicly and explicitly tied to a demand for a political conversion.
The president has broad authority, sure, but
the whole spirit of clemency is that it's supposed to operate outside of immediate partisan gain. When you use that authority to force a member of Congress to switch parties, you're crossing a very dangerous line.
You're blurring the separation of power.
You're blurring the separation of powers, and you're signaling that the highest tools of justice are for sale. They can be bought to secure personal political advantage.
The implication, then, is that if you get a favor from this kind of leader, a pardon, whatever, your career, your life, even your family's reputation, is now mortgaged to his personal agenda.
That's exactly. The crime in this transactional world, it isn't the fraud Keller was accused of.
No.
The crime is failing to show loyalty. The power of the highest office is used not to serve the nation, but to enforce the personal demands of the leader.
It's a foundational characteristic of an authoritarian system. The state apparatus gets mobilized to ensure personal servitude.
And if you resist, the retribution is public, it's comprehensive, and it targets your most vulnerable associations, your family.
It completely transforms the concept of loyalty. It's not loyalty to the Constitution anymore, or to a party platform, or even an ideology.
No, it's personal loyalty to the aspiring dictator. And the punishment for refusing is designed specifically to isolate and humiliate you.
And this transactional view of power, it leads us right into the next section. The just astonishing moral decay within the Republican Party, specifically how MAGA figures were forced to defend or, just completely evade talking about a series of incredibly corrosive pardons.
This is where the hypocrisy becomes almost suffocating.
Let's start with the big one, the narco trafficker pardon. The sheer scale of this is hard to wrap your head around.
We are talking about the pardon of Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras.
Right.
This isn't some minor figure. This man was convicted in a U.S. federal court for crimes that are, they're monstrous. The sources confirm he was a major narco trafficker.
And the numbers.
The numbers are staggering.
Right.
He was responsible for trafficking an estimated 400 to 500 tons of cocaine into the United States.
500 tons.
And he was operating directly with people like El Chapo and the Sinaloa cartel.
The human cost of that much cocaine, it's just astronomical. It results in the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans from overdoses, from violence, and the source material has these details that really confirm the depth of his criminality.
The quote is particularly chilling.
It is. There was evidence that he allegedly said, quote, "Let's kill the gringo, get the drugs up their nose."
So this is not a man who, made a mistake or was a low-level player. This is a strategic enemy of the United States population by any rational measure.
So this raises the fundamental question, right? How do politicians who built their entire careers on being tough on crime, the ones who preach locking everyone up for everything, how do they rationalize pardoning a mass-scale convicted narco-terrorist?
And the answer, which is documented very clearly in the sources, is that they can't rationalize it. So they don't. They resort to rhetorical fraud.
Let's look at the mechanisms they use, the evasion tactics. Starting with Senator Tom Cotton.
Wow, Senator Cotton.
He gets confronted about this massive, high-profile pardon. What's his immediate move?
He uses a rhetorical smokescreen. It's a classic move. He immediately deflects by claiming ignorance. He says, "I haven't spoken to Trump about that pardon."
As if that's the point. Whether he had a personal conversation is irrelevant.
It's completely irrelevant. And then, crucially, he suggests there may be strategic reasons related to U.S.-Honduras relations that somehow justify this.
So that's the first layer of the defense. Pretend that this deeply morally corrosive act is actually some obscure, complex geopolitical maneuver that we just don't understand.
But the sources make it clear that that argument is, frankly, intellectually dishonest. A senator who sits on key national security committees, who constantly demands accountability for international drug crime.
He should know the facts.
He should not only know the facts of a major federal conviction like this, he should recognize that pardoning a man linked to El Chapo is the opposite of a coherent anti-drug strategy. It undermines everything.
And then he pivots.
Immediately. He pivots right back to his standard hardline stance. We should convict them, and we should lock them up, and once they're locked up, we should keep them locked up.
The failure is in the disconnect, isn't it? He's maintaining the pretense of this tough-on-crime ideology, while at the exact same time refusing to apply that ideology to the actions of his political patron.
It just highlights where the real priority is. Personal loyalty to the leader trumps any professed principle. It renders his entire hardline position a complete and utter fraud.
The evasion from Senator Eric Schmidt was maybe even more telling, more aggressive.
It was. He just went for outright denial. He claimed he was not familiar with the facts or circumstances
about one of the biggest narco-trafficking cases in recent U.S. history, a story that was all over the news.
Schmidt's response was a form of active, aggressive ignorance. When the interviewer pushes him, asks how a U.S. senator could possibly be unaware of a case this significant, one that involves the deaths of thousands of U.S. citizens.
He doesn't engage with the facts.
Not at all. He attacks the interviewer's ratings, and then he calls the very notion that Trump could be soft on drugs ridiculous.
So attack the messenger, not the message. Ignore the material reality of 500 tons of cocaine. What this interaction shows about both Cotton and Schmidt isn't just a willingness to lie. It's a deep comfort with intellectual and factual denial when confronted with something that challenges their leader.
They prioritize protecting the political figurehead, and by extension their own position in the party, over any sense of intellectual honesty or, accountability for crimes against the nation.
The sources show this isn't a one-off. This evasion is systematic. It's deployed instantly to shield the political core from the moral consequences of its actions.
Okay, so the Hernandez pardon was about violence and death on a massive scale. Now we have to move to the Gentile pardon, which speaks volumes about the economic priorities of this whole movement.
This one is about protecting financial criminals who prey on everyday Americans.
David Gentile. He was the architect of a massive $1.6 billion Ponzi scheme.
Billion with a B.
With a B. And the targets here weren't big institutions or Wall Street banks. The victims were between 5,000 and 10,000 small retail investors.
Regular people.
Regular people who trusted their life savings to this scheme. This is capital theft on an enormous scale. It's profoundly damaging to the economic stability of thousands of working families.
And he was sentenced to 7 years, which is already a pretty light sentence for stealing $1.6 billion. And then he was pardoned.
And what's really revealing here is the contrast in media coverage. The sources highlight this as a key part of the manipulation strategy.
Right. While the political class and the media are focusing intensely on these local, state-level scandals, especially ones that can be spun for racial or political gain, which we'll get to.
This enormous federal pardon of a Ponzi schemer who stole billions from thousands of regular people. It barely made a ripple. It just disappeared from the national conversation.
And this serves as really critical evidence for the argument that the political right, which is heavily influenced by wealthy donors and oligarchs, uses these tactical pardons as a mechanism to shield rich frauds from accountability.
It institutionalizes the protection of capital crime. It sends a message.
And we can connect this directly to the concept of the K-shaped economy, which the sources allude to.
For listeners who might need a refresher, a K-shaped recovery is what happens after an economic shock. The wealthy, the highly educated, that's the top arm of the K, they recover quickly and they thrive, their assets grow.
While the working class, small business owners, retail investors, the bottom arm of the K, they just sink deeper into debt and instability. The gap widens.
And the Gentile pardon fits this perfectly. It is a political act that reinforces the upper arm of that K.
It sends a clear message. If you are an architect of vast financial fraud, one of those people who benefits most from wealth extraction, you will be protected by the highest office.
And the retail investors, the middle and working class people you defrauded, they're left to absorb the losses and suffer the consequences. Accountability is systematically removed for the powerful, and the economic divide is actively widened by state action.
So, we have the normalization of pardoning narco terrorists and billionaire fraudsters. The final piece of this section is, it's maybe the most concerning. It's the open justification and normalization of violence, extrajudicial action by elected officials.
This brings us to the controversy around the former Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth.
Hegseth was facing questions about a couple of things. First, his use of the encrypted app signal for classified war plans, which is a huge national security risk.
A massive breach of protocol.
And his involvement in a double-tap strike on alleged drug boats off the coast of Venezuela. And this is where the analysis of accountability and violence really comes together.
Senator Curtis from Utah. He's positioned as a supposed moderate.
Right, the thoughtful one.
He was asked a very direct question. Knowing what you know now about the security lapses and the potential for civilian casualties in that Venezuela strike, would you reconfirm Hegseth?
And his response was a masterclass in feigned moderation.
He claims he couldn't possibly answer without conducting as much thoughtful research as he did the first time.
Which is a way of saying, I'm not going to answer.
Exactly. And at the same time, he dismisses these news reports about survivors of the first strike being killed in the second strike as, impossible to verify.
This technique is designed specifically to stall accountability indefinitely. Curtis creates this illusion of rhetorical complexity, suggesting that the facts that are reported in the public domain are somehow insufficient.
And that allows him to avoid taking any kind of moral or political stand on national security breaches and, potential war crimes, all while maintaining this facade of being a judicious, thoughtful public servant.
But the discussion with Senator Tom Cotton about the strike itself is the most chilling part of these sources.
It really is.
The interviewer pushes him on a crucial factual point. The boat they targeted, the one allegedly carrying drugs, was reportedly heading east, toward Suriname or Europe or Africa. It was not heading directly toward the United States.
A critical distinction.
So if it's not heading towards U.S. shores, can you still claim it's an imminent threat that justifies using lethal force?
Cotton's initial response is another deflection. That didn't come up in my briefing. But that quickly dissolves into this sweeping, terrifying justification for violence.
He argues that any boat loaded with drugs, crewed by groups that he labels foreign terrorist organizations, meaning the cartels, is inherently a valid target.
Regardless of its immediate trajectory.
Regardless of where it's going. This legal redefinition is a massive deal. Cotton is asserting the right of the U.S. military to engage in lethal force in international waters against targets that do not pose an imminent threat to the U.S.
Simply because they're associated with drug trafficking. It's an enormous expansion of operational jurisdiction and a shocking disregard for international maritime law.
And the sources capture his explicit comfort with this, his enthusiasm for it.
When he's asked if he was comfortable with killing people in these circumstances, even if they appear to be surrendering, he doesn't hedge at all. He doesn't hesitate. He states, I'm not just comfortable with it, I want to continue it.
I want to continue it. So when you take this whole section together, you have a political infrastructure that pardons financial and drug criminals who benefit the elite.
While at the same time, it normalizes and sanctions lethal force against individuals who are deemed foreign enemies, even when they pose no immediate threat to American citizens.
It's a clear shift. It's political governance embracing legalized violence and murder, far outside the traditional bounds of a declared conflict.
So we've established this moral decay, this transactional corruption of individuals. Now we have to zoom out and look at the structural strategic collapse of the U.S. government itself.
And for that, we dive into the recently released United States National Security Strategy document, the NSS.
This document is. It's arguably the single most damning piece of evidence in all the sources we have, because it officially documents a profound policy shift that directly benefits a key strategic adversary, Russia.
And the NSS, we should be clear, this is supposed to be the blueprint for America's entire global posture. It's the guiding document.
And the global reaction to it confirms the depth of the betrayal. Vladimir Putin offered explicit praise for this new NSS. He stated that it perfectly aligns with the way the Kremlin views the world.
I mean, that's not an accidental compliment. That is a strategic adversary expressing gratitude for U.S. policy. It's an endorsement.
To understand just how serious this alignment is, you have to contrast this new NSS with decades of post-World War II American strategy.
Since 1945, a core goal of the U.S. was to stabilize and unify Europe, to foster strong economic and political blocs like the European Union, to serve as a democratic counterweight to authoritarian regimes.
This new NSS just shatters that entire legacy, takes a sledgehammer to it.
Let's get into the specific language that creates this reversal. The document states that the U.S. goal is now to, quote, cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory within the European nations.
I mean, just stop and think about that phrase, cultivate resistance. That is a stated intention to destabilize and undermine our primary democratic allies.
It's a formal policy declaration. We will intentionally interfere in the internal politics of EU member states in order to weaken the EU's cohesion.
And that goal aligns perfectly with the Kremlin's core long-term strategy, which has always been to dismantle the EU to prevent a unified Western front.
And the alignment doesn't stop there. It continues with NATO. The second specified goal in the NSS is that the U.S. officially desires to end the perception and prevent the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance.
Stopping NATO expansion has been the central, non-negotiable demand of Vladimir Putin since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
It's his number one issue.
To integrate that demand into the official United States national security strategy it's just an astonishing act of strategic alignment with an adversary.
You're handing Russia a massive geopolitical victory on a silver platter. You're validating its long-standing grievances and effectively guaranteeing the buffer zone it has always sought.
It signifies either a complete catastrophic strategic blunder or, much more likely, a deep philosophical capture by interests that are fundamentally opposed to collective security.
And the strategy goes even further. It talks about propping up right-wing extremist parties in Europe. Who are these groups? Why would a U.S. strategy mandate supporting them?
These are parties like the Alternative for Germany, the AfD, or Marine Le Pen's National Rally in France. These are groups that are fundamentally anti-EU, anti-immigrant, and often very vocal in their desire to align with or appease Moscow.
So the NSS is openly stating a policy of supporting these extremist nationalist groups precisely because they seek to break down European unity.
Yes. It officially legitimizes what used to be considered clandestine geopolitical interference, and the NSS draws a clear parallel between these European right-wing extremists and the MAGA movement in the U.S.
So the administration views these anti-globalist, nationalist, anti-EU movements not as threats to democracy, but as necessary tools of state policy.
The synthesis here is unavoidable. The United States, through its official policy blueprint, has strategically adopted the core goals of its primary adversary.
It is committed to destabilizing its democratic allies in Europe and conceding to a central Kremlin demand regarding NATO.
This institutionalized self-sabotage suggests the threat to the U.S. democratic system isn't just external anymore. It's housed within its own strategic policy documents, reflecting a profound internal shift away from liberal democratic solidarity.
Okay, so if the national security strategy is the plan to undermine Europe, this next section reveals how the domestic propaganda machine is being used to provide the public justification for that plan.
The goal is to manufacture an acceptable narrative of European villainy to distract the public from the deeper corruption that we just talked about.
And the primary disinformation campaign being pushed by right-wing media is this narrative that the European Union is somehow censoring Elon Musk and attacking American social media companies.
It's a classic blind spot story.
Yeah.
It's designed to generate rage and mobilize a specific base using a foreign policy narrative that sounds like an attack on freedom.
So let's cut through the noise. What is the EU actually doing, according to the sources? They're enforcing something called the Digital Service Act, or DSA.
Right, and the DSA is fundamentally a consumer protection and transparency law. It is not a content restriction law.
So it's not about censorship.
It is not about censorship. It mandates three critical things that these digital platforms hate. First, it requires absolute transparency in advertising. They can't hide who is paying for political ads.
Yeah.
It eliminates fake verified check marks and requires platforms to actually verify user identity to combat the rampant fraud and impersonation we see online.
And the third piece, which is maybe the one they resist the most.
It requires that independent researchers be granted access to the algorithms. This allows outside parties to audit how algorithms might be manipulating user behavior or promoting harmful content, which is a massive threat to the proprietary secrecy these companies hide behind.
And the sources confirm that the $150 million fine against Musk's company was for deceptive advertising and a lack of transparency. It was commercial regulation.
Commercial regulation, not content censorship.
But this clear regulatory enforcement is completely reframed by right-wing media as an ideological assault on American free speech.
Okay.
And this is where the disinformation loop closes, right? It ties right back to that NSS goal.
Absolutely. This false narrative becomes a domestic execution tool for the NSS's anti-Europe policy. You paint the EU as these authoritarian regulators who are hostile to American innovation and freedom.
And you create the perfect story to rile up the MAGA base and build domestic resistance against any partnership with Europe.
It strategically aligns the domestic media message with the Kremlin's goal of destroying European unity. It's a two-pronged attack.
And this strategic distraction has to be contrasted with the massive corruption that's being ignored. Let's go back to that stark media disparity between the billion-dollar genteel Ponzi pardon and this localized Minnesota fraud controversy under Governor Walz.
The Minnesota scandal, it involves the theft of hundreds of millions from a federal nutrition program. It's a serious crime, and the sources confirm the perpetrators have been prosecuted. There have been over 50 convictions.
So the system is working, in a sense. People are being held accountable.
Yes, but the media focus, driven by right and center media, is overwhelmingly political. The argument is that Governor Walz should be thrown out of office simply because the fraud happened on his watch.
The narrative is relentless, and it's designed to be politically damaging to Walz. And then Donald Trump steps in, seizes the opportunity, and amplifies the whole thing with just explicit racism.
He turns a localized legal issue into a national race-based attack. He explicitly linked the scandal to Walz providing shelter to the Somalian community.
And the language from the source material, it's horrific. He called the entire Somalian population garbage humans and garbage people.
The whole community.
The whole community. So let's just formally synthesize the manipulation here. On one side, you have intense national media focus on a state-level scandal where the perpetrators are actually being prosecuted.
And that scandal is then amplified with explicit racism to damage a political opponent.
And on the other side, you have the federal government pardoning a man, Gentile, who defrauded thousands of retail investors of $1.6 billion. And that story is?
It's largely ignored. It vanishes. This disparity shows the calculated strategy of the oligarchs and the political right.
They use the media machine to direct public outrage toward these localized, politically useful scandals, especially when you can tie them to race or opposition figures.
And this manufactured outrage ensures the public looks away from where the real, colossal wealth extraction and corruption is happening at the federal level, where the system is busy pardoning and protecting the architects of that K-shaped economy.
The outrage is managed, it's weaponized to protect the truly powerful.
Which brings us to our final thread. The institutional creep of these authoritarian mechanisms directly into domestic law enforcement and how this is now impacting U.S. citizens.
We have to analyze the defense of IC agents who are aggressively targeting and pursuing American citizens.
The sources detail specific, really alarming incidents. You have the 22-year-old mother in New Orleans chased to her home by masked IC agents, even though she's screaming she's a citizen.
And the family in Florida, where the woman was only released after she was able to get her driver's license from her car to prove her citizenship. These are U.S. citizens being subjected to aggressive detainment tactics.
And the defense of this behavior, which comes from former IC official Tom Homan, is the key mechanism we need to understand.
Homan justifies targeting citizens by arguing that since illegal aliens often claim to be citizens, IC is to operate on reasonable suspicion.
Okay, so let's dig into that legal framework. Reasonable suspicion is a foundational legal standard. It comes from Terry v. Ohio. It allows a police officer to briefly stop and question someone if they have specific articulable facts that lead them to reasonably suspect criminal activity.
It's a lower bar than probable cause, but it has to be tied to suspicion of a crime, not just what someone looks like.
But Homan's defense dramatically expands this authority for immigration enforcement. He's arguing that the mere fact that a person might be an unauthorized alien provides reasonable suspicion.
Which grants agents the power to stop, question, and briefly detain anyone they suspect, regardless of their actual citizenship.
It's institutionalized racial profiling with a legal cover. Homan essentially admits that the dignity and constitutional freedom of U.S. citizens has to be sacrificed as collateral damage because they look a certain way or fit a profile.
He normalizes it. He says the detention of citizens happens all the time, and it's just part of the process until they can prove who they are.
The constitutional threat here is crystal clear. We are seeing the inevitable expansion of these racially charged authoritarian policies, originally aimed at migrants, directly into the policing of American citizens.
The tools of suspicion, interrogation, and detention are being turned inward.
And just to confirm the pattern of deliberate dishonesty, Homan was also asked to defend Trump's garbage comments about the Somali community in Minnesota.
Tying it all back to that distraction campaign we just discussed.
And Homan immediately tries to fabricate a context. He claims Trump was actually referring to generalized public safety threats or national security threats.
But the sources are explicit about Trump's language. He referred to the whole community. He labeled all Somalians garbage humans without making any distinction between law-abiding citizens and alleged criminals.
Homan's defense is just a lie. It's designed to retroactively sanitize blatant bigotry and make it sound like a legitimate policy concern.
And this pattern, officials fabricating justifications for explicit racism and violent, unconstitutional policies, even when those policies harm American citizens, it demonstrates the complete collapse of accountability.
They will defend the indefensible to protect the political figurehead and maintain their own institutional power.
So when we put all this source material together, what we're looking at is a structural analysis of power being completely inverted.
We've charted the explicit demand for personal loyalty overriding the public good. We've seen the moral and factual decay of the tough-on-crime ideology.
And a U.S. strategic policy that mirrors the core objectives of a geopolitical adversary.
We have seen this systemic corruption shielded by a pervasive disinformation war, one that directs your attention away from billions in pardoned federal fraud and toward manufactured outrage and localized, racially charged political attacks.
And we've concluded with the most immediate domestic threat. This institutional creep of authoritarian tactics into domestic law enforcement, infringing upon the rights and the dignity of American citizens under the cover of reasonable suspicion.
The sources compel us to acknowledge that a political class is actively defining certain groups. Whether it's Honduran citizens on a boat, U.S. citizens of Somalian descent, or American citizens targeted by ICA because of how they look, as politically and physically expendable, valid targets.
So, if the state is wanting to use its highest offices to pardon financial criminals who target thousands of retail investors, and simultaneously embrace policies that target its own citizens based on racial suspicion, the central question we have to ask you is this. What does this tell us about who the political elite truly views as its allies, and who it views as its disposable enemies?
When the rule of law becomes purely transactional, and political loyalty is the highest possible virtue, accountability is only ever demanded from the powerless. This is the moment when the very definition of justice is systematically inverted.
Stay vigilant, stay informed, engage critically with every single headline. The mission is to see beyond the noise and to understand the mechanism at play.